For Family by Nanook 888. Chapter 18. The Cost of Freedom. Part 1.
Welcome, young Skywalker. We have been expecting you.
Piet hadn't been idling his time away since his commander had gone off to battle. Oh no, far from it. Emperor Palpatine, you have overreached yourself. You will not be forgiven for threatening Naboo. Top priority official summons had been dispatched to the most capable and influential officers of the upper echelons of Imperial Command, quelling any refusal with the indisputable weight of Lord Vader's authority.
I am the Galactic Emperor. I don't need forgiveness.
Those esteemed men had been rather miffed, to put it mildly, when Piet had informed them that he would be addressing them in Lord Vader's stead. Never for a mere fleet admiral would the Grand Moffs and Moffs, Grand Admirals, Admirals, and Generals of the Empire have hightailed their way halfway across the galaxy to the Kalindia system with no notice whatsoever. What have you done, Leia?
A most unfortunate accident. She was caught in the crossfire.
With Vader. But here was the piece de resistance, the priceless holo-recording, courtesy of Skywalker's droid, revealing the closed-door encounter between the Galactic Emperor and the most infamous Jedi of their time. Your empire already destroyed Alderaan, Your Majesty, and you attacked Lord Vader when he tried to prevent you from destroying Naboo. How many more planets will you threaten? Will you destroy Corellia? Denon? Korlag? Imperial Center?
I am the master of the Sith. I am the ultimate power in the galaxy. All planets are mine to use or destroy as I wish.
There was no hint of the officer's previous ire now as the usually placid Emperor snarled overhead. Piet had never seen such a large auditorium of people so completely stunned to silence. And what of the billions, trillions of people who inhabit these worlds?
They are insignificant.
Was that someone gasping? Piet kept an amused eye on the sea of frozen, astonished faces. A few even appeared as if they might faint. He quirked a brow. Should he have prepared medics? Life is precious. You should not treat it so callously.
You weren't concerned when you blew up the first Death Star and murdered 2 million people.
There were no murmurs of festering resentment that usually occurred in Imperial circles whenever that incident was mentioned. Only dead silence, their anticipation for the Jedi's reply hanging in the air. I had no choice! Alderaan had just been destroyed and Yavin 4 was under target! How many more systems would have followed? Your actions now speak for themselves. The Death Star had to be destroyed. If there had been another way, I would have gladly taken it. They stared at the back of this Jedi's head, his stony expression easy to imagine listening to his unyielding, resonant voice. Which is precisely what brings me here. This time, we have another way. The luminous scene of the Death Star's throne room disappeared, leaving some of the men blinking and others glaring into thin air from below contracted brows. It had been a long hour. Piet had had them escorted directly to the briefing auditorium as soon as they had set foot aboard the Executor and explained the imminent overhaul of leadership. Heated outbursts had been reasoned with, and a few violent punctuations suppressed by stormtroopers personally loyal to Darth Vader, while Piet waited for the transmission that could make or break this deal. But it had been well worth the wait. However much Piet could reason or detail the facts, nothing could seal the coffin more absolutely than the Emperor himself. And their not-so-benevolent ruler had done that job splendidly. Piet rotated in his seat to face the shocked assemblage, eyes locking onto any who returned his hard gaze. Not many did, startled as they were to have the very foundation and figurehead of their faith in the Empire revealed to be a farce. No longer could they be assured that their home world would be safe from the homicidal despot who seemed all too eager to blow up his own. No longer could there be any blind hope that their faithful allegiance would be reciprocated by the Emperor. Piet glanced across to the captains of Death Squadron. Their loyalty couldn't be questioned, while Vader followed the Emperor's will. But whether their allegiance would still hold now that Vader had asserted his challenge remained to be seen. Piet hoped that he had done enough. His voice carried easily in the well-designed acoustics of the auditorium. This recording will be broadcast across the HoloNet in 1 hour. By that point, either Naboo will be destroyed, or the Emperor will be dead. He surveyed their grim and shaken expressions. Your families, every person you know, all those who are important to you, will know the truth of the Emperor. If you and they are fortunate enough to survive this battle and see each other again, what is it that you will tell them? That you aided Palpatine in the genocide of his own people, and your own people could become the next target? Or that you fought to safeguard the future of the galaxy under my command? There was a moment of stunned silence, some still pondering on the gravity of it all, before they realized exactly what he just said. Your command! Someone challenged. That was all it took for the room to erupt. Who do you think you are? Refuse to take orders from absolutely outrageous, nothing but the fleet admiral. Report on naval discipline. What gave you the right? Piet held up a hand. Which they had sufficiently quieted to disgruntled murmurs, he dropped the bomb in a steely voice of authority. I will command because I outrank every officer in this room. Prior to Lord Vader's departure from the Death Star, he appointed me the Deputy Supreme Commander of the Imperial Forces. Dead silence. One could have heard a rank pin drop. There's no such position, someone eventually challenged. Check your missives, Piet riposted. Enough was enough. Flanked by an imposing phalanx of Vader's stormtroopers, he rose to his feet and delivered his ultimatum. As of this moment, each and every one of you are on notice. Swear your allegiance to Lord Vader, or you will be relieved of your titles and ranks effective immediately. Master Yoda? Saying it a second time made no difference. In much the same fashion as he'd often seen shoddy engineers puzzling blankly over complex schematics, Anakin stared dumbfounded at the diminutive Jedi Master. Are we dead? It was the only possible explanation that came to him. Those elongated ears perked up, and impossibly large eyes widened, before an amused chuckle that always sounded like a cough escaped those wide lips. Yoda eventually subsided, caught his breath. Not yet. Sick have I become. Old and weak. But strong am I with the Force. It still wasn't sinking in. Anakin struggled to connect the elusive dots. How?
Trained with me, Luke did, after Obi-Wan's passing. Brought me with him when he came. Found you, I did, on the ledge there.
Luke was here! Wherever here was. That thought had Anakin sitting up in a hurry, and much to his surprise, he found that he could. It wasn't just his body. His mind also straightened up, focused, and the Force surged through him once more, filling and purifying every nook and cranny of his being like fresh meltwater pouring into the lakes of Naboo. Immediately, he was aware of the conspicuous lack of darkness. He was attuned entirely to the light side, with the dark side having been a part of him for the greater portion of his life, its poison having taken root years before the downfall of the Jedi. The shocking contrast of its absence now was almost akin to when he had discovered Luke and Leia. He stretched out in his rebirth, reveling in his freedom, immersing himself in the Force and extending himself into it in return. There was another presence so vast and far-reaching that he might not have noticed it at all had the small green figure not been squatting beside him. Merging with and diffused through the very fabric of the Force, hidden in plain sight, was Yoda's presence, so gargantuan that it was almost indistinguishable from the Force itself. Was this an illusion, or had the Jedi Master somehow become even more powerful in his even older old age? The helmet and mask, its visors smashed beyond use, lay discarded a short fling away on the lip of the passageway's opening to the reactor shaft. So he was still on the Death Star. This only made Master Yoda's presence beside him all the more surreal. There was no sign of his lightsaber, although that was hardly a surprise. Fissured white lines had been burned into his armor, the chest controls dead of its familiar blinking lights. He looked a wreck. But inside, he realized that he had actually felt worse. Much worse. There was a general background ache in what remained of his organic body, but it was nothing compared to what it ought to have been after enduring Force lightning of that magnitude. You healed me? There was a familiar of confirmation. Yoda was still hunkered down beside him, his triple-clawed hand resting on a gimmer stick. Surely that couldn't be the same stick. If it hadn't been for the topping of silvery hair that seemed to have thinned to only a few wisps. If it hadn't been for the general air of age that lingered in that leathery-lined skin that seemed even more leathery and lined than in his memories, Anakin would have believed this a dream. Or that he was truly dead, contrary to Yoda's insistence. But surely nobody would look quite so fossilized in the living force. Yoda tilted his head, peered at him with half-lidded eyes.
That face you make. Look how so old, young eyes.
Anakin fought to wipe the grave expression off his face. It didn't come naturally after 2 decades of hiding in the mask.
No, of course not,
he tried to assure.
I do. Yes, I do.
Yoda murmured, unperturbed. He flared with amusement.
When 900 years old, you each look as good you were not, huh?
The Jedi Master's good humor only served to wedge the blade of guilt deeper.
Master Yoda.
He trailed off as his heart pulled in 2 polar directions. Even in his wildest dreams, he had never imagined that he would ever see Yoda again, and suddenly finding himself face to face with the ultimate figurehead of the Jedi Order that he had betrayed and annihilated, he was agonizingly aware of how much needed to be said. But his eyes flickered down the corridor. The Jedi Master easily understood his dilemma.
Need you? I do. Go to them, you must.
He said kindly. Anakin nodded mutely, but something still held him in place, a metaphorical boulder that bore down on him, while all the while the invisible string continued heaving on his heart, trying to drag him away. There was little time. The words grated and stuck in his throat like sawdust, much as when he'd attempted to apologize to Leia. He was struck by the sheer inadequacy of any words she could put together. How could any apology ever come close to being sufficient? It couldn't, was the blunt answer. But if Yoda had already floored him by materializing on the Death Star, it was nothing compared to the words that followed.
Virgil, I have. Extend my own apology, I must.
Anakin was vaguely aware of his jaw trailing somewhere along the floor.
We did very well in following the Jedi Code. Guided us, it should have, not dictated. Complacent the Jedi have become. Evolve we did not, adapt we did not. Blind and inflexible we were.
The lines on Yoda's face became even more pronounced. The long ears drooped.
Terrible, unspeakable, your deeds have been. But bear the responsibility at home, you do not. Turned to the order for guidance, and sought my advice you did. But prepare you to fight the darkness, we did not. Blameless we are not, for our own fall.
Anakin suspected that either his hearing or his brain or both must have been damaged. He had destroyed the Order and brought the galaxy to its knees. And Yoda was apologizing to him?
Master Yoda.
Great change the Jedi Order needed.
Yoda interrupted, having none of his objections.
The will of the Force this might have been. A new beginning this is.
But
a very sharp jab of the gimmer stick made him swallow any more words.
Your repentance I do not doubt. Return to the light side you have. Sin no more you must, young Jedi.
Anakin blinked hard as his eyes burned and blurred. Yoda's voice was suddenly very gentle.
In grave danger, the younglings are. Go to them you must.
Anakin nodded and hauled himself to his feet. He turned expectantly, but the ancient Jedi shook his head.
A different task I must perform. Part again, our paths must.
Anakin hesitated, then firmly, willing it to be true in every way.
We will see you later.
May the Force be with you, Anakin Skywalker.
And with you, Master Yoda.
Yes, Admiral, that's what I've been telling you. He can barely take care of himself, let alone rescue anybody.
But it changes nothing. Our plans have no bearing on the fact someone should have told us earlier that Vader's here, that Luke's here.
Medine and Han both threw themselves to the floor to duck the smattering of blaster fire overhead before continuing their respective conversations.
We're far from finished here, Admiral.
Medine urged into his comlink as he gunned down a stormtrooper who had been too slow to dive for cover. We're pressing on to gain control of the super laser. The super laser control room is just below the throne room, Chewie growled as Han fired down the long corridor. Good, then we'll go with Medine most of the way, then split, Han yelled back. Chewie aimed his bowcaster at a metal casing protruding from the wall. The fuselage exploded, blowing away half the wall with it and the stormtroopers nearby. Go! Medine shouted, brushing the squad through the gap into an adjoining, less populated corridor. Sir, we're losing forward deflector shields! Down to 40%! Intense firepower continued raining down on the Star Destroyer Chimera from both the Valiants and the Justice. The shield generators, already under heavy assault, were taxed further as several teams of X-Wings joined the fray. 35%, sir! Grand Moff Tarkin stood frozen on the bridge of the Chimera, hands clasped behind his back so tightly that they had long gone numb. In the privacy of his high-strung thoughts, he generously cursed Pitt and Vader and the rebels and everyone and anyone he could think of. He still had no idea how Vader's sly admiral had managed to sabotage the Reaper in the first place, but now the over-promoted man from the Outer Rims was also somehow turning his small triumph in managing to attend the peace talks despite his Super Star Destroyer being out of commission into one giant catastrophe. 20%! The communications controller shouted again. All right, Kane barked back. Break formation, evasive maneuvers. Behind him, General Strag could ground his teeth as several brows rose in surprise right across the bridge. The Grand Moff was an idiot. He couldn't have found his own nose if someone had punched it. Something Strag was sorely tempted to do right now, let alone lead a battle that ought to have been a foregone conclusion. Cayenne had no idea of how to organize their superior number to maximum devastation, how they could most effectively target the rebels' tough battle cruisers, how to manipulate the enemy into taking risks they didn't want to take. So far, it had mostly been a blundering free-for-all with only localized efforts at strategy. But just as Cayenne had come up with his first sensible suggestion of coordinating their attacks to trap the rebel battleships, he now wanted to turn tail and run simply because the Star Destroyer Visage had been destroyed, and a second rebel fleet had arrived. He tried to reason. The main assault is focused off the port bow, Grand Moff. We could resurrect power from the aft end. You heard me, Admiral! Kine snapped, irritated at this obvious suggestion. Of course, the Admiral was right, but Kine didn't like being shown up. 25%! We still outnumber them, sir. We need only deploy to our advantage. You have my orders, Admiral. Captain Palayan, Kane said, giving the order directly to Strag's first officer. Evasive maneuvers. It was ridiculous. Star Destroyers didn't evade when under fire. They retaliated. Palayan glanced at his Admiral for confirmation. Strag tried again. But then the Justice would escape. We almost have them. With all due respect, sir. Admiral Haas Strag, if you are incapable of following my orders, you will be replaced with somebody who can. The bridge stopped as one, collectively waiting on the Admiral's call. For 5 gloriously thrilling seconds, Strag actually entertained the prospect of leading his whole crew to mutiny before he relented. If there was anything worse than having this idiot of a Grand Moff commandeer his bridge, it was having this idiot of a Grand Moff commandeer his bridge without him being there to curb the worst blunders. With great reluctance, he nodded to his captain. It wasn't lost on any of them that the men only followed Kane's order on his approval. It was small consolation to think that his men would likely have followed him, whatever his decision had been. 20%! Kane simmered in resentment and considered how to rid himself of this officer who dared to question his authority. An idea struck him, and he hid a smile in his ingenuity. He would trip Strag at his own game. Admiral, bring those rebel ships down. Strag awaited further instructions. But as Kine simply continued viewing the battle around them through the giant view screens with his back turned, Strag saw straight through him, and any last scrap of regard still reserved due to the Grand Moff's rank was destroyed. Kine knew he couldn't do the job himself, so he was setting Strag up to take the fall. It was the lowest of the low. And yet, it was very welcome. This was exactly the card he needed, and it was far better than mutiny. He couldn't even be court-martialed for it. He deliberately misinterpreted Kine's vague order to a scale that he knew the Grand Moff had never intended. Very well, sir, Strang acknowledged stiffly, as though he was following orders, signaling to one of the communications controllers, who promptly began dispatching the Admiral's comm to the whole fleet. As per your direct order, I will take over command of the battle. Kane spun red-faced on the Admiral, but Strang had already received a nod from his chief shield operator. The only signal needed to confirm that power had already been rerouted to forward shields, and now promptly spoke over the fleet-wide comm. This is Admiral Strang. Grand Moff Kine has ordered me to take over command. All Star Destroyers deploy on my mark. Cool blue on glowing yellow, Jedi and Sith locked eyes. Light against dark, the Force seethed roiling and volatile. Until, with a lazy blink, Palpatine leisurely turned his back. Luke followed his every move with wary suspicion as the Emperor ambled back to the throne. Leia's uncertain gaze flickered to him, and he gave a small shake of his head. Not yet.
How do you think it will feel, my young Jedi?
Came the mockingly sympathetic tone.
To know that you could have saved Naboo, if only you hadn't failed to take the opportunity.
Luke let the taunting wash over him, kept himself detached. Naboo will be unharmed. It's over for you, Palpatine.
The Emperor cackled. And yet, here I am, still on the throne, and there you are, attending me. You lack the courage to strike, young Skywalker. Naboo is lost.
The Death Star will not fire. A calm statement of fact.
Perhaps you refer to the imminent double attack of your rebel friends.
Luke's gaze sharpened, the only outward expression of a spike of anxiety. Sidious grinned, enjoying the Jedi's shock immensely.
Everything is transpiring according to my design. Your friends, stumbling their way through the Death Star as we speak, are walking into a trap. And your rebel fleet will soon be lost. Come, boy, see for yourself.
He waved at the viewport surrounding him. Neither Luke nor Leia needed to step any closer to see the immense sea of Star Destroyers surrounding the flickering flashes of exploding rebel ships.
From here you will witness the final destruction of the Alliance and the end of your insignificant rebellion.
Luke's hand itched to reach for his lightsaber, but he quelled the urge. He was not in the right frame of mind, and knew that going on the offensive now would only invoke the dark side. He could feel Leia's attention on him again, her gaze bordering on desperation. He gave another shake of his head. Wait. He withdrew from the growing agitation building inside, focused on resettling his calm. Sidious was aware of something that the young Skywalker was not, and he deliberately continued addressing the Jedi to keep attention away from the true object of his machinations. Distaste colored his words.
Your friends on the Death Star will soon be dead. All the hundreds of pilots and the thousands aboard your battleships will perish. It is all just a matter of time.
Luke wasn't entirely calm, but neither was he letting the words affect him. It's useless, Palpatine. The Sith will not see victory this day. There was a ripple in the Force, a warning of great calamity. A moment before, there was an unnatural green. The bright green laser beam zoomed through space, slammed into the Mon Calamari starcruiser Maria, and blew it to dust. The tremendous shockwaves radiated out, sweeping up the Retaliator with which the Maria had been in close combat, and snapping the Star Destroyer into two clean halves of fore and aft, and shattering dozens of starfighters which couldn't distance themselves fast enough, buffeting a multitude of others. Wedge's X-Wing groaned, almost being pulled apart before the shockwaves passed. He had barely steadied before he had to bank hard, avoiding the charge of 5 TIE fighters that came tearing towards him. That blast came from the Death Star, Lando exclaimed from another section of the battle. Even in the utter chaos, Wedge had one eye on his scopes, and he saw something concerning. He flicked his comlink over to the closed frequency with squadron leaders, and home one. Admiral Akbar, this is Red Leader. The Star Destroyers here are converging into formations. The Dominator was aligning with another Star Destroyer, and he charged his trio of X-Wings through the tight gap. It too, Admiral, Lando agreed.
It is the same throughout their fleet.
Akbar stated. Analysis of their deployment indicates that the changing tactics. Star Destroyers are converging into formations and coordinating their attacks, targeting shield generators, cannons, gun turrets, and particular weaknesses depending on ship design. Looks like they've had a change in leadership, Riken said grimly. The Falcon shuddered from a head-on proton torpedo hit, but the damage was mostly absorbed by the shields. Lando held collision course with the offending TIE bomber until the last possible moment before he spun away just in time to leave the imp to smash into the TIE fighter that had been in pursuit in the shadow of the Falcon's girth. Then let's show him what we're made of. Leia rounded on the Emperor seated on the throne only feet away. Stop this! Palpatine's face was a picture of dark contentment. He spread his pale hands.
It is out of my control.
Luke was much more calm, but no less insistent. Give the order to cease fire. The Emperor smiled, nonplussed.
It would make no difference. The super laser controls have been set and buried under millions of layers of encryption. The codes themselves have been destroyed and it will take hours to break. There is nothing that can be done to change it, no matter what orders I give. The super laser will now fire once every 2 minutes, targeting rebel battleships at random, until it is time.
Luke glanced at Leia. Her intense gaze was fixed on the Emperor. The time for? Luke asked quietly. He experienced a very unhealthy desire to tear the despicable grin off that scarred face.
Surely you haven't forgotten, my young Jedi. When I invited you above the Death Star, I gave you a countdown.
The ugly smile stretched further.
Soon we hit 0, and Naboo will be no more.
How could you do this? Leia hissed incredulously. Your home planet, your own people! Palpatine rose like a dark specter from the throne, contempt hardening his facade.
I am Sith. No planet, no people has any claim on me.
He stepped around the throne to the viewport to regard the flickering battle spread out around them, just as another flash of green illuminated the throne room. The super laser beam struck what appeared from this distance to be a Casselian blockade runner, blowing it into a million pieces. The Emperor's gravelly voice was full of dark triumph.
The rebellion is finished. The Jedi are no more, and once you are both dead, there will be none left to challenge me. I am the ultimate power in the galaxy.
Luke's absolute rejection of that statement was the final catalyst. The pivotal moment from faltering preparation to deadly calm. He was ready. Anchored in the Force, the connection vibrant and powerful, he regarded the Emperor. Sensing this shift in his presence, Palpatine turned to face him. You're correct on one score. This ends here, Luke stated matter-of-factly as he floated his lightsaber into hands, not bothering to hide the motion. But it ends between us. Between Jedi and Sith. Without further ado, he brought the green blade to life. Unhurried but unwavering in his intent, he climbed the remaining steps and held out his free hand for Leia to step back. Palpatine eyed him derisively as he approached, seemingly not even bothering to defend himself. Luke, however, wasn't fooled. He closed the distance at the same measured pace, gripped his lightsaber in both hands, raised it without preamble, swung. The Sith blade flashed to life. For the briefest moment, it was drawn back horizontally alongside Palpatine's face, the red glow illuminating the animalistic snarl and lips drawn back over rotting teeth, eyes glowing yellow from the shadows of the cowled hood. Sidious became a horizontal hurricane, spinning through the air, a vortex of destruction propelled by the dark side. But faster than the physical eye could track, Luke was a blur of movement as he slipped past the abrupt attack, knocking the red lightsaber aside. Continuing the movement, utilizing the momentum, he swung in an arc at the back of the Emperor's head. Palpatine was no longer there. He moved so quickly that he might as well have teleported, unleashing a series of ferocious attacks from behind. Luke spun, hacking it down to avoid amputation, blocking high, mid, high again, then low, swiping across at a sliver of an opening before he was back on the defensive. They had been scaling mile after mile of pipes, all disgustingly, spotlessly clean, but without a single cleaning bot in sight. You'd have thought we would have seen a droid or something by now, Han mumbled as they continued navigating through the service ducts in the highest levels of the Death Star. X2 swung across to a parallel network of pipes. The whole station is on security lockdown. Anything that could transport detonators or arms is offline. I'm not complaining. It makes it easier for us to dupe the security recordings, Maydeen said from behind them. Nothing to give us away. I don't like it, Han grumbled. It's too quiet. Yeah, too easy, X2 agreed. We're already alongside the super laser control room. The throne room is just above us. Keep alert. An eye on the scopes at all times, Maydeen reminded the rest of the squad working in tandem, one of them always keeping watch while the others shimmied along. Han waited, hanging from suspension wires until Maydeen climbed up alongside. General, Han murmured quietly, Chewie and I have to go. We've got something we gotta do. Maydeen frowned, opening his mouth to ask what Han thought he was doing, leaving the group at such a crucial time. But then he must have seen the answer on the Corellian's face. He gave a firm, encouraging nod. Go. Do what you have to do, General. For all of us. Han nodded back, equally determined. Come on, Chewie, he called as he swung away and headed up. Even from the first few blows, Luke noted how remarkably different Sidious's style of fighting was. With his father or Yoda, there was still a subtle configuration to their forms, an underlying structure of movement, despite the variation and adaptability of their attacks. Sidious, however, was a completely unpredictable entity. Sharp jabs one moment, then wide, forceful swings the next, a flurry of light, flicking slashes followed by deep, lunging blows. He flew about as though his aged body was of no hindrance, leaping and attacking through the air with astonishing agility. The only constant, and it wasn't really an encouraging one, was that he was always blindingly fast. It required every ounce of Luke's concentration to hold his ground, drawing constantly on the Force to block and parry and dodge the vast range of attacks raining down on him from all angles. He barely noticed Leia looking on with growing anxiety at the blurry mass of red and green that looked like 20 sabers instead of 2, her hands clasped on the bridge railing, knuckles white. But then a glimmer of hope, just the faintest hint, but Luke instantly noticed, so insistently was he focused on the Emperor's every movement. And there, again, the switch from the force-imbued blows that sent Luke's boots skidding backwards to the sudden Taj's side with the cut aimed under his guard was just the tiniest infinitesimal bit slower. And gradually it became more obvious, the Emperor's movements becoming fractionally slower and weaker until the two were on a more even footing and Luke could press his own fair share of advantage while parrying the attacks still ferociously beating at him with every other blow exchanged. Leia's elation bubbled on the edge of his awareness, but Luke strictly maintained his focus. Ever so cautiously he began testing the cracks in Palpatine's guard. He purposefully let some opportunities by so as not to reveal all his cards just yet, but he came close enough to delivering serious injury and forced Palpatine on the defensive. Back and forth they went, raining blows on each other, parrying and countering, pushing and pulling with the Force, closing in for close quarter combat and drawing away again out of reach or for long-range strikes. They circled the throne, leaping up and down the steps, traversed to and fro across the wide expanse of polished floor with Sidious snarling away like an enraged rancor while Luke grit his teeth in quiet resolve. Luke sensed a twitch in the dark side just as the Emperor dove forward in an attempt to disembowel him. Luke didn't know if he'd propelled himself or if the Force had flung him, but he was abruptly launching through the air, both legs swinging over the attack as he twisted and blocked in midair. He'd barely landed before he launched a dizzying series of counterattacks, sending the Emperor off balance. He drew back behind the throne. He managed to collect himself to control his surprise at his unusual display of acrobatics. Perhaps Palpatine's vast array of fighting styles was inspiring his own creativity before the yellow-eyed fiend was again attempting to send him packing to the netherworld of the Force. But Palpatine, while still moving too fast to be followed without aid of the Force, had slowed again another notch, and Luke's opportunity came. Deflecting a low strike, he circled his momentum back in towards the neck, and as soon as Palpatine began the expected block, there would briefly leave his right ribs exposed due to having to compensate for the throne's backrest closed at his elbow. Luke dipped his saber for an inescapable slice. The force blared in warning, out of the blue, in a double combination so instantaneous that even with his force-enhanced senses, Luke struggled to follow it. Sidious smashed the green lightsaber aside and lunged for the kill right inside Luke's guard. It was pure instinct as he jerked his head back and swiped his blade across. Palpatine's deflected lightsaber seared a blaze across his left bicep. Luke retreated as fast as he could, backpedal while scrambling to regain his footing, blindly blocking the ceaseless deluge of attacks delivered so swiftly that he only had a vague sense of them. And then the glare of the red tip filled his vision and fire erupted down his right cheek. He did the only thing he could. Heaving on the force, he exploded outwards, knocking Sidious back a step. It brought him but a scant moment's reprieve, but it was all he needed to throw himself into the air with the only cohesive objective to distance himself as far as possible. His brow knitted together, arms crossed and fingers drumming. Anakin glanced back and forth between the various miniature holo-recordings flickering below him. If it wasn't one of the many frequent patrols of stormtroopers, then it was some officer or other marching along with all the affected air of one pretending to be on important business, doing an unusually efficient job of impeding his progress. But just as he was earnestly beginning to consider the implications of barging through the Death Star, as he was, unmasked for all to see, one of the holoviews caught his attention. A short, squat droid, moving smoothly, unlike the naturally undulating motion of walking bipeds. Waving his fingers at the three officers staring blankly into thin air to release them from their trance, he slipped out of the security checkpoint station, dashing from one dark doorway to another and confusing any passing stormtroopers into wandering blankly away. He swiftly made his way and found the unmistakable astromech droid. He ducked into a quiet corridor nearby. "Hey, over here," he whispered. The droid recognized his natural voice immediately and spit over in a flurry of relieved trills. Anakin crouched beside him. "Boy, am I glad to see you, R2. R2 buzzed in dejection, spreading a raspberry for emphasis. "Aren't they just?" Anakin agreed in frustration. "They're usually a bunch of nerfs, but the one time we want them to be useless, they're actually on alert. I might just have to knock them all out to get past them." R2 bleeped questioningly and projected the Death Star schematics, zooming along a possible route. Anakin glanced over the network of blue lines, leading exactly where he needed to go. "Of course, that's brilliant, R2," the droid beeped mournfully. "No, you won't be able to go that way." Anakin rested a gloved hand on the shiny head. "Don't worry, I'll be there soon and they'll be fine. But there is something else that would be perfectly suited to your talents. Will you help?" The Brahatok-class Dorian gunship Tortarak exploded under the combined bombardment of the Denunciator and the Imputator. A dive fighter barreled through the dispersing dust cloud, barely missing the Falcon's curved disc. As soon as the die had whooshed past, Lando threw on ship on its tail. "Let him have it, Ice!" he called over the ship barcom. "He won't even see it coming," Azamine boasted from the gun turret. The defender's shielding was quickly overpowered by the Falcon's modified quad laser cannon, and within seconds it exploded into a shower of bright fragments. That dreaded green super laser flashed again, and this time the Corellian gunship Mastala was blown to smithereens. "Admiral, we're running out of time," Lando called over the private comm. "I agree, the Alliance fleet will not last long under the sustained attack," Akbar replied. There were some seconds as he presumably conferred with others before he continued. "General Mayday and General Solo can deactivate the shield. Commence your attack on the Death Star's main reactor." It hadn't been the shield that he'd been hoping for them to deactivate. There was a noticeable delay before Lando acknowledged gravely, "We're on our way." He schooled his voice into something more befitting a general before speaking authoritatively into the open comm. "Red group, gold group, all fighters follow me. We're commencing our attack on the Death Star's main reactor. Green group, join white group and provide cover. Grey squadron, blue squadron, maintain positions and defend our cruisers." "Luke!" He landed in a crouch down on the main floor. He was breathing heavily, both from physical exertion as well as the intense focus of applying the force to temper the blazing pain on his cheek and arm. "Luke!" He sensed her step towards him from his right and gently nudged her back with the force. "I'm okay, Leia." Luke warily eyed the motionless figure at the top of the steps, two glowing yellow orbs floating amidst dark shadows. Sidious hadn't been fatigued at all. The gradual reduction in speed and strength had merely been a ploy to draw Luke in and provoke him into making the exact attack that he'd made, one that would have left the right lightsaber bedded into his lung had he not been so connected to the Force. It had been a flawless trap, and he'd fallen for it hook, line, and sinker, though fortunately not so completely for the final execution. Clever, he acknowledged. He flexed his left arm, painful but still usable.
Wasn't it?
Palpatine waved a hand at him graciously.
Rather impressive yourself. You ought to be dead.
As Palpatine slipped his lightsaber away in his robes and began descending the steps from the dais, Luke rose from his crouch, lightsaber clutched in his prosthetic hand. The Emperor drew to a halt at the base of the steps, a mere 10 paces separating them.
But what a pity,
he intoned, not sounding sorry in the least,
that it was all a wasted effort.
Sidious snapped his arm wide. Force lightning blasted out towards Leia. Luke's hand flew out, the Force pulsing, knocking Leia backward out of its path. But the spidery blue lines of light arced through the air, bending in like a curveball, and slammed into Luke. He didn't hear his own scream as white-hot pain ate through every cell of his body. He might have been torn limb from limb or diced up by Palpatine's lightsaber. It wouldn't have made the blindest bit of difference. There was no thought, only an eternity of excruciating agony raging through him. Abruptly, the inferno abated, and he toppled back into his mind, every sense and nerve ablaze. He found himself on the floor, his prosthetic hand practically in seizure around his inactivated lightsaber. Through the haze came a bone-chilling realization. The Emperor had been concealing the full extent of his abilities. An unbridled conduit of the dark side, there seemed to be no restraint to the power he could deal out other than his own twisted desire to play with his victim. Luke heard enraged shouting and running footsteps, which were abruptly cut off with an "Ow!" He could sense enough through the Force to know the Emperor had hid his sister away. Leia! Drawing heavily on the soothing energy of the Force and grasping at the railings, he pulled himself shakily to his feet.
Jedi fooled,
Sidious snarled.
Your feeble skills are no match for the power of the dark side.
The Force lightning erupted from both gnarled hands and shot directly forwards. Luke only just managed to activate his lightsaber in the nick of time. Nothing. Not even a blip. X2 shook his head after rescanning through multiple calibrations and turning up identical results, just the lingering heat readings from the bodies of stormtroopers scattered around them. We can't get any reading through those blast doors, sir. Me neither, Tran said, checking the small screen on his own scanner. What do we know about the layout? Madian pressed. X2 activated a miniature hologram of the blueprints he'd lifted earlier from the Imperial network and traced various lines as he explained. 3 rooms, doorways aligned centrally. We'll enter from the side of the first. The second also connects with the elevator shaft up to the throne room. The last is the super laser control room. Sounds easy enough, Mize said. Trey frowned. Except we'll be going in blind. And we can be sure there'll be heavy resistance in there, Madian added. The eggheads are tired and useless, Mize argued. A vacant look passed over X2's face. They know we're coming. Tran waved at the fallen bodies around them. But we blocked their outgoing comm signals. X2 shook his head. No. They already knew. This bunch was just a ruse. Madian threw him a curious glance. You're beginning to sound like Commander Skywalker, Lieutenant. X2 affected a casual shrug. Just a hunch, sir. The Alliance High Command knew of his colorful history as former stormtrooper turned Jedi collaborator turned rebel, but his Force sensitivity wasn't something he wanted them to know about yet. Skywalker alone knew that he was one of the 2 cloned in secret from the Jedi Knight Fallon Gray by the Kaminoans, and he wanted to keep it that way. The general studied him for another moment longer before letting it drop and signaled the squad. They made fast work of clearing the bodies out of view of the room beyond, while X2 hacked the computer strapped to the wrist of the stormtrooper squad leader for the access codes. They hugged the wall on either side as the double blast doors began parting in overlapping diagonal sections. X2 peered down at his scanner, and still with his movements as close to the wall as possible, he made a rapid succession of gestures. A fist, 5 fingers, and a semicircle underlined. Matey nodded. 15 imps, their positions spread out through the room. Challenging, but not impossible. He gave the command, a closed fist opening flat, 2 fingers, then go! The rebels pulled down the visor of their helmets and adjusted auto buffer settings. 2 flash detonators were charged and chucked into the room. There were 2 blinding flashes in quick succession, accompanied by an ear-piercing siren. Shouts from several disoriented imps greeted them as the rebels charged into the room with blasters alight, quickly mapping the vantage points and cover in the large sector control room. Immediately, however, they almost stumbled to a halt at the wholly unexpected sea of color before them. Not the humdrum white of fatigued stormtroopers, but the bright crimson of elite Imperial Royal Guards. The rebel starfighters flipped and zipped and spun their way through the dense flotsam of bolt cruisers, chasing each other as much as the growing number of pursuing TIE fighters as they tore their way across the battlefield. The clawing superstructure rushed up towards them, growing impossibly more massive as they sped forth larger and larger, and yet the Death Star continued to grow before them, filling their viewports and beyond. "We're ready to go, Admiral," Lando said heavily over the private comm with Home 1. "Look at the size of that thing!" "Cut the chatter, Red 2!" Wedge ordered. Akbar's order came 10 seconds later. "You may proceed, General. The shield generator has been deactivated." "Copy that, Admiral." Lando returned to the open frequency. "All ships proceed." Wedge was closest to the opening. "We're going in!" he acknowledged and swung his X-Wing, closely mirrored by his wingmen as they dove into the exposed superstructure. "Here goes nothing," Lando mumbled to Nien Nunb as he followed course in the Falcon. At first, the shaft was wide enough for 3 ships to surge forward side by side. The only lighting came from their ships, and the laser fire being exchanged between the rebels and the pursuing TIEs. Lando swallowed, dreading giving the order and yet knowing there was little choice. "Lock on to the strongest power source. It should be the power generator." "Copy that, Gold Leader." Wedge seconded, equally grave, but refusing to let Lando stand alone as they raced towards the harrowing possibility of having to execute the deaths of their friends. The shaft narrowed before long, and the ships filtered down into single file. Gold and red squadrons comprised of some of the most experienced pilots in the Alliance, and they all reacted on instinct as the tunnel twisted and turned, avoiding protruding structural frameworks as they also dodged fire from the TIEs behind. Wedge snapped his control stick aside, avoiding a proton torpedo from one of the pursuing TIE fighters. A double explosion from behind racked the ships with their shockwaves, and a quick glance at the scanner told him that an X-Wing as well as a TIE fighter had not been so lucky. "What the?" The startled cry from the leading ship was all the warning they had before the starfighters found themselves practically falling into an immense cavern, the ceiling appearing comparatively low against the sheer breadth of the space. It seemed to span the greater portion of the diameter of the massive battle station. However, the alarm call wasn't from the size of the place, but rather from the absence of anything inside it. It was a vast, empty cavern, noticeably absent of the crucial components they had been seeking. A bewildered voice filtered over the comm. "Where's the main reactor?" The Force lightning surged upon the green lightsaber, lighting up the throne room. Darth Sidious was the very embodiment of the dark side, more powerful, more devastating than even his father could have imagined, and undoubtedly more so than Luke. Anchoring himself with a conscious effort on keeping the encroaching whispers of fear at bay, Luke stretched out with the Force. What should he do? What could he do?
"You were unwise to deny the dark side,"
the Emperor hissed.
"Countless numbers will pay the price for your lack of vision."
The Force lightning still continued to flood towards him, seemingly indefatigable against Luke's depleted shielding. It was a perilous balance between healing himself with the Force and expending enough energy to deflect Sidious's sustained assault. His rear leg slipped a fraction towards the yawning drop of the reactor core.
"The planet obliterated," Sidious taunted. "Billions dead. Your last surviving relatives gone."
The Force convulsed, betraying their shock. In the flickering blue reflection of the lightning, Sidious looked entirely too pleased with himself.
And all because you refused to do what was needed to stop me. How will you live with yourself to think that you watched hopelessly as your fleet was lost and your friends died, as the rebellion was crushed and you failed to save Naboo?
A sudden blast from the side burst through Palpatine's litany. The lightning abruptly halted, and he tumbled back as though he'd been hit, although Luke had seen that the bolt had ripped through nothing but loose sleeves. There was a second blast, again lost in the robes. Luke glanced towards Leia. This galaxy screeched to a standstill. It wasn't the blaster in her hands that clenched his heart in fear. It was the sight of her brown eyes flecked with yellow.